Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure having you today with us with this series of webinars that offer a comprehensive exploration of urban studies, focusing on practical methods and theoretical applications for analyzing urban landscapes. We will delve into techniques for simulating and capturing the multifaceted nature of urban environments, encompassing both tangible and intangible aspects. This is in a nutshell what we are doing in our spatial analysis and simulation lab or community that we are developing. And I would like to share with you our website and have a look of what we are doing actually. So we are dealing with spatial analysis, dealing with space settings and relevant theories, and trying to apply and understand spaces through time, through different urban morphology parts. And we have like an extensive publications about these issues. In addition, we are trying to find different patterns and layers of analysis like this one, which is like eating analysis, try to understand behavior of eating distribution through the city itself, and trying to understand where and how people navigate through the city through different time. In addition, we're interesting to another aspect, we try to capture what's already there using photogrammetry, low technique issues, trying to understand the spaces in order to make a logic out of them and try to find patterns and comparative analysis between things. In addition, of course, we do have a series of webinars dealing with urban simulation with distinguished scholars throughout the globe. And actually, our young lab, we have just established in last August 2024. So we have done some quite interesting research and activities. In addition, we do have workshops. The last one was in Porto, Portugal, in December 2024. And we do have other workshops dealing with evacuation scenarios, tracing urban evolution, and all of these issues. In addition, we do have our own software. We have developed a space-centric software. We call it Hayes. It is an open source. Anyone could add or remove or whatever, or even enhance that software if you wish. And we have a regular announcement for our issues with addition to our yearly report of activities. And I would like to switch right now to our today's webinar, because it is really interesting one. About the webinar, we're going to present key insights from our distinguished guest, Professor Vítor Oliveira. He is going to talk about insights about his book, his coming new book on New York's ground, Dense, Diverse, and Sustainable, published by Springer, exploring the critical roles of urban density, diversity, and sustainability in shaping resilient urban future. The talk will shed light on strategies applicable to urban planners, designers, policymakers, and researchers as well. I would like right now to go to a biography of Vítor, because it's really interesting biography, by the way. So we have with us our distinguished guest, Professor Vítor Oliveira with us, and actually he's the president of the International Seminar on Urban Forum, ISUF, principal researcher at the Research Center for Territory, Transports and Environment, and professor of urban morphology and spatial planning at UL. He is associate editor of Urban Morphology, advisory editor of the Urban Book Series from Springer, founding editor of Revisita de Morfologia Urbana in 2013, and past president of the Portuguese Language Network of Urban Morphology in 2011 till 2017. His latest books are ISUF, Urban Morphology and Human Settlements in 2024, Urban Morphology, An Introduction to the Study of the Physical Form of Cities in 2022, which is translated to a number of languages like Chinese, Portuguese, and Turkish. Morphological Research in Planning, Urban Design, and Architecture in 2021, and Teaching Urban Morphology in 2018. He has translated with Claudia the classical book about study in town planning analysis by M.R.G. Consum. His books and papers received over 3,000 citations. This is by the Google Scholar. And it's an impressive biography, and I would like to thank him very much for joining us today. Vítor, the floor is yours. Let you share your screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Nabil. It's a pleasure to join you. I hope the internet allows us do this in a proper way. Okay, so once again, thank you for inviting me to be here with you. It's a pleasure, and I'm going to talk about my latest book, which is it isn't published yet, but it's going to be in the next months. And the book is called On New York's Ground, Dense, Diverse, and Sustainable. So before getting into the specific contents of the book, I would like to go to the books that I have been publishing since 2016, just to highlight that this has been a systematic attempt to deal with structural issues. I hope this one is the one. Okay, so when I was preparing this presentation, because this is the first time that I'm talking about the book as a whole, I tried to look for a good picture to start, and I went to the photographs that I had from my field survey. I collected a small group, and then I selected this one. It's impossible for a photograph to capture the whole topics that are discussed in a book. But I think this one, although it doesn't fulfill that task, I think it's a good beginning. As you can see, we have here in the foreground a group of young ladies. They have some differences in terms of race, in terms of religion, and in the background you see a group of establishments, small establishments, 3 small establishments of different sectors of activity. You see that the building faces the street, and there are some other things that you don't see, but I ask you to trust me. This is a place with many plots, a place with many buildings. These buildings and plots are in a small to medium-sized street block, and the block is defined by a set of streets that are well connected. It is this relation between the physical world and the social and economic dimensions, and also the environmental dimension, that I try to address in the book. To deal with the physical world, I use a concept that was proposed by M.R.G. Conzen in the mid-20th century, the ground plan or town plan, as you prefer. And the concept brings together these 3 elements of urban form: street systems, plot patterns, and building arrangements on the ground. The concept was developed by other researchers, people like Jeremy Whitehand, Terry Slater, and many others that throughout the years have developed it and made it more robust. So why a book that 65 years after the conception by Conzen, why a book that is going again back to this concept? For the first time, the concept is used here to examine how specific types of ground plan coexist and mutually influence particular performances of socioeconomic diversity and environmental sustainability. We focus on one specific characteristic of the ground plan, which is density, that so far neither Conzen or any of the other researchers have placed this attention in this specific characteristic. And most of all, because we propose the ground plan as a unifying concept that can integrate many aspects of our cities. And it is because of this attempt to bring many things together, that my presentation is a bit long. So I hope you be patient, and I hope that it will continue in this register without the interruptions that we have in the beginning. So I use New York to explore these arguments, and contrary to other case studies that sometimes we select based on preferences, or it could be this city or it could be another city. In this case, it had to be New York. Why? Because 150 years before Konzen conceptualized the concept of ground plan, this idea was at the core of one of the most notable planning documents in planning history, which was the 1811 plan for Manhattan. And that is why it had to be New York. As I am analyzing New York, what do you need to know about the city not to get lost? The city is divided into these 5 boroughs, so Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, and Staten Island. Each borough is into community districts, these thin gray lines that you see within the boroughs. Each community district is into neighborhood tabulation areas, and each tabulation area is into census blocks and census groups. And I'm going to mention these names throughout the presentation. So the first step in our analysis is addressing both the ground plan and the building fabric. If we look at the city or at the settlement in a structural way, I would say that the most basic division in terms of land is between land for movement and land for occupation. Land for movement is essentially streets, squares, all the system of public space. Let me call it streets to make it more simple. Streets allow us to move in cities. They allow us for encounter and for a first level of social interaction that can then be developed or not. As you might expect, as one might expect, some parts of the system perform better than others. Some parts of the street system make our movement easier, and others make it more difficult. And one of the reasons for this is the existence of nodes that can diversify our flows. So here, the density of 4-way nodes is a key aspect to understand connectivity. When we look at this map, we see that, for instance, connectivity is higher in Manhattan or in Brooklyn, and it is lower in Staten Island. But, of course, no borough is homogeneous. I told you that the average connectivity of Brooklyn is high, but if we look, it has different parts. It has some streets that are very well connected. It has other areas that are not so well connected. One important thing also when we analyze connectivity is that this can be given by different, for instance, by different geometries. When we look at the 2 images on the top, they have all these parts of the 5 boroughs have similar levels of connectivity. But for instance, when we look at the 2 images on the top, we see that the same level of connectivity is given by different geometries. Or when we look at the fourth and the fifth images, we see that again we have similar levels of connectivity, but in one case we have an urban landscape that is mainly made of street blocks that have a peripheral occupation of buildings, while in the fifth image we have a landscape that is made of buildings that step back from the street. So it's mainly small buildings in the middle of plots. When we look at the land for occupation, we identify the street blocks, and one important thing is how these street blocks are divided into plots. Simplifying a very complex thing, I would say that the higher the number of plots that we have on a street block, the higher the number of agents and strategies. Another important aspect of plots is that small plots are easy to change. They respond very well to new demands of society, of economy, while large plots tend to be static. Once you build a large building, it will stay there. No matter the problems they are created, it will tend to be there for many years. Contrarily to streets, when we look at New York, there are no significant differences between the boroughs in average terms. All these boroughs seem to have a high number of small to medium plots. Here, just an illustration of one of the things that I was telling. We can have, for instance, this is Queens, one of the New York boroughs. You see that the street blocks have similar size, and you see how the density of plots can vary within a sample of similar block sizes. And then we looked at buildings, and for us, one of the most important characteristics of building is where it is positioned. Does it face the street? Does it want to contribute to the vitality of the street, or does it set back and want to achieve some degree of privacy? We see that in New York, we find, as with streets, we find significant differences between the boroughs. So you can look at Staten Island and you see that is mostly orange, which means non-coincidence between building and plot frontages. But if you look at Manhattan or again Brooklyn, you see that is in this dark red, which means coincidence between building and plot frontages. So once again, to show that when we look into the boroughs, we see we can distinguish differences, and even in a place as Staten Island, that is mostly dominated by the type of urban landscape that you see on the top, if we look well, we find one of or two streets like this one that we find on the bottom part of the slide. Our morphological description of these boroughs enables that we find characterizations that are unique to each of these places. For instance, we can say that Manhattan has a very high number of four-way nodes, a very high very high number of small and medium-sized street blocks and plots, and also a very high coincidence between building and plot frontage. And this characterization is unique. You cannot find it in the other boroughs. And if we looked, for instance, at Staten Island, it would be exactly the same. So after looking at the ground plan, we analyzed the building fabric, and we started by individual analysis. So here you see the building height. Although our collective image of New York is just a city of skyscrapers, it's not nothing like that. The skyscrapers are concentrated here on the tip of the southern tip of Manhattan, and here south of Central Park. And of course, we see some other small areas, but 1/3 of the buildings of New York is 1 or 2 stories. This is important, but for us, the building height by itself, it's not that relevant. We think that it should always be considered with the street width. Together, they make the street section, which is a fundamental element for relating the ground plan and building fabric. It is the structural basis for many other important decisions to be taken. For instance, what is the ground floor going to be? What is the division between space for cars, space for pedestrians? Will I have trees in my street? So it really is the structural framework for street life. And so we developed this kind of analysis that tried to understand the variation between the ratio of building height to street wide. This is just some examples from Manhattan and Brooklyn. And we realized that a denser ground plan type seems to support a wider variety of building fabrics. On the contrary, a sparser ground plan type, like the one that we have mostly on Staten Island, it gathers uniform or a monotonous group of buildings. Another important issue when looking at these two things, ground plan and building fabrics, is how they change over time. One important number here is that in New York, over 2/3 of the buildings were erected before 1950, which is a very impressive number if we compare to cities that are comparable to New York. With this, it's no surprise that the city has a high number of historic districts. It has over 150 historic districts, and half of it is in Manhattan. And if you look at the first image, here you see this white area is the Central Park. This is the Hudson River, and here you have the largest historic district in the city. In the second figure, you have an illustration of it. I would say, again, simplified, that this is the typical look of a street within this historical district, and we try to understand how this district that is being classified in 1990, how it is changing. And we see some significant transformations. In the first figure, you see how a group of plots have been amalgamated and a new building with a building white that has nothing to do with this character has been created. In the second image, you see a less significant change. It's just 2 plots amalgamation, but then again, the facade doesn't seem to fit very well here. While you can also find other cases that, although with a contemporary design, it seems both these cases seems to have a concern with fitting into an historical district. Again, I'm mentioning this because this is an historical district. So the second step was to try to understand the relations between the ground plan and the socioeconomic and environmental dimensions. So our first focus was on people, and the question here was, does the ground plan matter for the social fabrics? We selected a number of case studies to have detailed analysis. I mentioned in the beginning the expression neighborhood tabulation area. This is what these 5 cases are. It's one per each borough. How were these case studies selected? I tried to analyze areas that were not extreme situations. So I'm not picking a very poor case in the Bronx and a very rich case in Manhattan. I tried that all these would be close to the city average in terms of the social indicators that we are addressing, which are income, employment, education, and race. Another aspect that was important was that within these cases, it would be possible to distinguish different types of ground plan, so that you can say that this is one thing in physical terms, and this is a rather different thing. This was possible for the Bronx, Queens, Manhattan, and Brooklyn. For Staten Island, it was not possible because in physical terms, in morphological terms of its streets, plots, and buildings, the island is very homogeneous. So this is the researcher in action, counting people in the Bronx. And of course, I cannot go through all these case studies, so I will only use East Village in Manhattan to illustrate the process. And it is like that in all the other 4. So the first thing is to distinguish different ground plans. And here you can see that the area of East Village is made of 14 census tracts. You see this one in the middle that was not considered because it was too diverse. But 11 of these census tracts, the ones that are in brown, they can be classified as A, and the 2 that are in yellow can be classified as C. What does this mean? It means that in A, you have medium to high connectivity, medium street blocks, small plots, and coincidence between building and plot frontages. In C, you have quite the opposite. Low connectivity, large street blocks, large plots, and buildings that set back from the plot frontage. So we can really say that in physical terms, this is one thing and this is a rather different thing. So what we had to understand next was that if this division, this profound division that we found in terms of the ground plan was also true in terms of the social indicators that we are addressing. And as you can see here, the difference is quite remarkable between the two census tracts that we have classified as ground plan C. Here in the table it is wrong, it's not B, but it's C, and the 11 census tracts that we classified as ground plan A. So these differences were found not only in East Village, but also in Bedford, Queensbridge, and Soundview. And as such, we can say that there is coexistence between particular combination of streets, plots, and buildings, and specific levels of income, employment, educational attainment, and race. Until here, we were only looking at, as you can see here, at average numbers. We also tried to understand what was behind each of these average numbers, and then try to assess the diversity of each of these places in terms of their social indicators. We found that diversity is higher in A than in C for income, employment, and race, but it was lower for education. So this means that this distinction that we have found out is not so expressive when we look at the all interval as when we look just at the average values. So after looking at people, we looked at establishments. We have used the same case studies, the same 5 case studies. And again, I'm using East Village to illustrate the procedure. In ground plan A, we found this very high density of establishments. It's always above 2 per hectare, and as you can see, in some census tracts, it's above 7, while in ground plan C, the density of establishments is really, really low. In one case, it's 0.1, and in the other, it's 0.4. We found similar patterns, similar distinctions in all the boroughs, and in average, the number of establishments in ground plan A is 10 times higher than in ground plan C. Just to zoom, we are still in East Village, but we are zooming in 2 specific parts to understand the diversity of establishments. So we have looked at the number, but we also wanted to see if there is diversity. This is the list of activities of the US government, and we see that in A, not only we have a very high number of establishments, but also 13 sectors of activity. So we can say that in our case studies, not in all cities, but in our case studies, a denser ground plan coexists with a higher density of establishments and with a higher diversity. I'm sure that you all know that New York is one of the most significant economic hubs in the world, but something that you might not know is that this is a city of very small businesses. 9 in each 10 is classified as a very small business. So we can speculate, we don't have consistent data, but we can speculate that this high concentration of narrow plots in the case studies may encourage the presence of such very small businesses. And then after looking at people and establishments, we looked at the consumption of land and at the consumption of energy. We started looking at land in terms of the basic distinction between soft and hard occupation, but our main concern was on the effectiveness of consumption. So I turned this land that could be rural or natural into urban, and what do I do with it? What is the purpose of this transformation? And so we looked again at the same piece of land in ground plan A and in ground plan C to see what was happening there. The density of housing units and establishments is higher in A than in C, but also the people that walk through these areas, the number of people that walk through the streets of a ground plan A is 4 times higher than that walks in ground plan C. As you can imagine, the data on energy consumption is very hard to find, so we had to analyze what we could receive, and the samples for the 5 case studies were not very high, I have to say, but even so, looking at East Village and also to the others, but these numbers are from East Village, the average energy use intensity and the greenhouse gas intensity are 1.6 and 1.3 times higher in ground place A. So we can say that the efficacy of land and the energy use for buildings and for transports appears to improve with increasing ground plan density. In our case studies, denser patterns of streets, street blocks, plots, and buildings on the ground accommodate higher numbers of residents, workers, and moving individuals. So land is being consumed and used more effectively. Buildings in denser ground plan seem to consume less energy than comparable buildings in sparser ground plans. I highlight comparable because we try to compare buildings that were erected in the same period, okay? And the last topic here, denser ground plans seems to encourage walking, seem to prompt people to reconsider the car use, which is also another way of reducing the consumption of energy. So the third step of the analysis is, I've talked about change, but change here is the major issue. Change in the past, and as you will see in the last slides, change in the future. I have selected New York because of this plan, because of the 1811 plan, which was prepared by 3 commissioners and a topographer named John Randall. And this plan defined the ground of Manhattan. It defined 12 avenues, 150 streets, and about 1,750 street blocks. Through the size of the plot of the street block, it defined the possible sizes of plots. Each of these plots could be 6 or 7.5 meters wide. This narrow plot frontage made that the rational position of a building would be facing the street. So these are just some basic rules, but with these simple proposals, the plan defined the ground while allowing flexibility for the 3-dimensional aspects and for the land uses. When we look at the first map is the plan, the 1811 plan. The second map is how Manhattan is today. We have significant differences. For instance, in the plan, we have a large open area here that was called the Ground Parade. And this was not developed as the plan forecasted. And as you might know, the plan didn't include Central Park. In addition to these large changes, we can do a quantitative analysis of what was done and what turned to be different from the initial expectations of the commissioners and John Randall. Two new avenues were created when we compare what we have today with the plan. The number of street blocks has increased. Nearly half of the plots seem to have survived, and this is absolutely remarkable if you think that these are 6 to 7.5 meters wide plots, and the coincidence between building and plot frontages dominates the urban landscape of Manhattan. This is quite something for a city that is one of the most dynamic places of the world. So after looking at the past, we try to understand if the ground plan, this idea that was proposed by Konzen, but that was also in the mind of these 4 New Yorkers, if this could be used for acting on the urban landscape. So we had a look through the ongoing initiatives of the New York Planning Department, and we have selected one plan to test how the ground plan could be fitted in. We did not select a bad plan. On the contrary, we selected a very good plan. These are the limits. So we are in West Brooklyn. This is Manhattan, and the Brooklyn Bridge is over here. And this is the Buenos Neighborhood Plan. The plan has a number of projects included, and we have selected those 2 that have a stronger physical component, because this is what the ground plan is all about. It has an influence, we have coexistences, but the basis is physical. So the projects are this, the redevelopment of this old industrial site called Buenos Canal. It has this amazing canal in the middle of it, and also the rehabilitation of these 2 housing states, Buenos Houses and Wyckoff Gardens. So what we tried to do here was to apply exactly those same criteria that we are using for analysis. So we have proposed streets, we have proposed to extend streets to enhance street connectivity. We have proposed to increase plot density and agent diversity by establishing these new plots and defining a modular system that was similar to the 1811 plan. And we propose to create more continuous facades by constructions that, by buildings that were closer to the street block peripheral occupation that exists in the area. For the 2 housing states, the strategy was similar, to increase the number of streets, here going back to what existed here in the street block just before the creation of the second housing state, increasing the number of plots, not to make more housing state buildings, but to bring people of a different socioeconomic status, to promote mixture. And the creation of these new buildings that, in addition to bringing new people, would contribute for a stronger definition of a stronger definition of the street. So to conclude, I will end with the image, with that same photograph that I've started. I hope that now the rationale for selecting it is more evident. The book explores a simple but I think a powerful idea. The way that we organize the ground of our cities impacts on everyday life. In other words, the street systems, plot patterns, and building arrangements that we lay down on the ground first have an influence on the main three-dimensional aspects of building fabrics, and then on socioeconomic diversity and environmental sustainability. This is relevant for analysis, for us to understand the past, but it's also relevant for designing the future. We selected New York because of the 1811 plan, but also because it was the world's first megacity. It is a place with a singular role in the last 2 centuries of humankind urban history. And we argue that if the ground plan could make it there, it will make it anywhere, like in the famous song. So thank you very much for your patience, especially in the first 10 minutes, which were an absolute nightmare to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vítor, for this interesting, valuable, insightful presentation. I really enjoyed each slide. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I might just start as like having like a privilege to ask the first question, if I may.
Please.
You've talked about concepts related to street systems, plot patterns, building arrangements, and relating them to densities, right? So how much density do we need? Is there some sort of a threshold that beyond this might be something challenging, and maybe below a threshold might be something less than needed? I mean, how much can we differentiate or spot exactly the amount of density that we need? I know that maybe this is a typical question, that's why you're smiling, but actually I'm always interested in how to measure things. I mean, how to approach the right density.
I'm smiling not because it's a usual question, but because it is the question. Because I would agree that there is a threshold, of course, and there are some people who devote their efforts to study that threshold. For instance, there is a very good Japanese researcher named Hiroyuki Usui, who has been reflecting on that topic of density. I would say that, and is doing that for Tokyo, because Tokyo is a place where that issue is very relevant, because in some places the density might be near that threshold, or it might have even surpassed that threshold. I would say that in general, increasing the density will bring this diversity in terms of economy and societal terms. And also, it will enable environmental sustainability. Yet, after a threshold, all this would start to have the opposite effect. I have the feeling that in most of the places, especially places that were created after the mid-20th century, after ideas of modernist planning come to the table, I have the feeling that a lot of these areas is very far that threshold. So they would need that density to increase. But of course, your question is an absolutely fundamental one. I have to say that I haven't devoted my efforts to studying the threshold lines. But another thing that I think it's important is that I think the major changes that we can have on our urban landscapes when we want to act on the urban landscapes and we want to achieve certain goals. I think that this variation of density is one of the most powerful tools to achieve these potential goals. But of course, we have to be very careful of how we use it. I think it's one of the most powerful tools in urban design, planning, spatial planning. But it's also something that it is often very badly defined. Sometimes we are in a group of people talking about density, and what I mean by density is not exactly what you mean. I'm thinking of people, you are thinking about square meters, the other one is thinking about the number of buildings. In my case, I like to think in the number of the density of nodes, in the density of plots, and in the density of coincidence between building and plot frontages.
Yeah,
So
totally.
it's a fascinating world, that of
Yeah.
density.
Yes, of course, and it's changed from culture to culture and place to place.
Sure.
It's changeable. May I follow up with this idea? I mean, because you have said that densities would bring, in a way, if I understood well, a mixed diversity between different socioeconomic classes. And I feel that this is a little bit difficult because if more densities, I mean, the upper higher classes were going to just move out of this place, if I see it in different cities. And even the only, I mean, available, if I'm going to increase the densities that much, is like the middle, low, and low classes only. And sometimes some of the classes are not represented there because of the high rent, maybe, or the high value of the land. So how to achieve this mixed diversity in a good way, if we can? I mean, can we, or is it something that we could do it with the densities, or do you think that you need to have other parameters or other factors?
Another excellent question. Density will not create diversity. Diversity has to be created by society. But urban form can favor that that availability of the society to accommodate difference, or it can make it more difficult. And I think that once again, my density, my definition of density, which I know is a very peculiar one, but it is the one that I defend in this book. My definition of density is about the four-way nodes, about the coincidence of build frontages, and in the middle, it is about plots. So when I mean density here, when I talk about diversity, I'm thinking especially of plots. If you have, for instance, I live in a street that in terms of plots is very similar to that of New York. Okay, so we have like 5 meters wide plot. So throughout our street, there are many things happening. Some of the people that live here are poor, others are very rich, but there is place for everything because you have these small units. When you go to large plots, which for me is low density, although you can have towers, but when you go to these large plots, you usually have a more unified body of residents. It could be very poor or it could be very rich. It doesn't that kind of form and that kind of density, if we understand density here as the density of the plots, that kind of form doesn't favor much this integration. So if you have a tower for rich people, hardly a poor couple could live there. But in a street like mine, or in a street like New York, this mixture can happen more easily because it's all made of small units, small plots where the strategies can be different. So once again, in my street, it's very easy to have a very poor guy living next uh, to a very rich person because because society allows this diversity, and second, because the urban form might be favoring this social diversity to happen. But again, these are very complex issues, and as you said, other things might to be taken into consideration. Here, I'm just trying to understand what different urban forms can be contributing for some other phenomena to happen.
Thank you very much. I don't want to take all the space for the questions. I would like to leave for the floor. And I think there is a question from Shaimeh. Shaimeh, if you'd like to say it by yourself, or you would like me to say it. And please, others, if you'd like to write questions or raise your hand, that's fine. Please, it's an interactive discussion. Shaimeh, are you with us? Let me read her question. Reflecting on climate change and rising water levels, did you notice any patterns in relation to the areas of high vulnerability to climate change? Do such areas have less density due to their vulnerability, or do they feature a specific social class?
I have to confess that I was trying to look for the question in the chat, and I did
the Q&A. If you wish, there is in the lower part in the Q&A. They are like dots. After the pause recording meeting info, there is Q&A. I can copy paste to the chat if you wish.
Okay, that would be helpful because I only see one question by Michel Leroux, but I guess that was not the one that you were.
Can you read it right now?
Yes, now I can. Thank you. Yeah. Reflecting on climate change and rising water level. I have to confess that my environmental look was only focused on land and energy. So I know that this is a disappointing answer, but that was not part of the things that I was studying. Sorry.
No worries. And I think there's another question for Ahmed, if you'd like to state it by yourself, if you wish.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Potter. It's actually an interesting presentation, as I suspected. Actually, it's more on a comment than on a question. I'm recently studying an urban regeneration and what is happening in the urban and our cities. And when I look back to Cairo and how it's very huge and very diverse, a lot of communities are getting together. And when I seeing how the ground floor actually affecting the urban fabric, actually it's so interesting when I find there's a busy or a dense spaces happening and there's an activities happening in some of the areas in the fabric of urban city, and others it's very I think it's very low dense causes there's no absolute function in the urban absolute function in the ground floor. So thank you for this inspiring presentation. Actually, it's very interesting that I will have a lot of keywords that I'm gonna look forward to search about in my master thesis. Yeah. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Ahmed. I would be very happy to keep in touch if you want to continue to talk. I'm not sure if I understood all that you said, but I think that you said one thing that I would like to go back again, and I'm sorry if I got it wrong, which is, again, my definition of density is very peculiar. For instance, I can have, imagine like a street block with towers of 50 floors, okay?
Yeah.
And I could have another street block with houses of just 2 floors, but I have 100 plots. In my conception of density, which is very personal, that group of houses would be more dense. Okay. And this is something that I think it's very important because it's a bit counterintuitive. But for me, that density of having more plots, more agents, more strategies is more relevant than the density of having these 20 towers that are all equal, all planned, imagined by the New York City Housing Authority. They have all the same profile of residents. So I guess that my conception of density is in itself already looking for diversity. So,
yeah, I understand actually. Yeah, this is actually what I'm understand too.
okay,
Because
great.
I think there is a similar in Cairo. Actually, there is a places that have I think it's the same class of people, but it's diversified with their what their types that are different from each other about their work or their religion or their diverse. But it's I think I'm following you, yeah. But I
Okay,
need to
great.
search more actually. Yeah, I need to search more about this topic actually.
I would be very happy if we stay in touch. So I
Yeah.
put my email in the chat. So if you want to continue, for me, it would be a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you,
Thank
doctor.
you. Thank you, Ahmed. And
Thank
call
you.
me Vítor, please. Not doctor.
Yeah, yeah,
Vítor.
okay. Vítor, thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. And may I have a follow-up question, and then we're going to have Mariam. If we are so sorry, but it's really we're lucky having you, so that's why we are asking a lot of questions. So I'm so sorry if we are asking too much questions.
I think that after my terrible beginning, I should be here for hours.
No, actually, we are lucky having you. As I understand your concept about densities. Do you think that if we add to this concept the movable densities, I mean, not the densities of the plots or the buildings, I mean, rather the tangible ones, that we might add the dynamic one of people? I mean, I could live in a place, but go to another place to work and come back. So densities of movements of people rather than the densities of the plots and the places. Do you think if we're going to add this layer, your interpretation to that place might be changed? I mean, looking at a place, because sometimes I have like a typical example in Dubai and Sharjah. I don't know if you have visited UAE, United Arab Emirates. Everyone is sleeping in Sharjah, which is a huge neighborhood or huge park, and everyone is working in Dubai. So it's like in the 7 in the morning, everyone is moving from one plot to another, and 6 the evening they're coming back. So the densities are changed. I'm talking about densities of people, not densities of the plots. So do you think adding this layer might change the whole perspective?
Surely, or even if I add the densities of people to this, because if you noticed, I've never mentioned the densities of people. So including the densities of people here would also change this. In a way, obviously, I think that this insight that you bring, the density of movement, of movement of residents, it would be something very interesting to explore. But the movement, the daily movement, in a way, it is captured here when I measure the density of four-way nodes, because this density of four-way nodes give us an idea of potential movement. Of course, that I don't know exactly. I mean, for some places, I counted people. So I have a connection between some particular areas that I've done this analysis and the maps, and they seem to fit well. But even so, even without making large samples and large counting of people, I know that through these maps of connectivity, I have a potential idea of movement, as you have, for instance, when you have a map of space syntax that I think you use in your analysis. But I understand that what you are proposing now is something real different and very interesting to analyze. Sure.
Thank you very much. There's a question from Mariam. If Mariam would say it? Yes. And then there is like a comment from Michelle, also after Mariam, if she's interested to say it as well. So yes, Mariam, please.
So I have a curious question. So when a ground plan types correlate with social indicators like income and education, do you think urban planning can directly reduce social inequalities?
Well, thank you, Mariam. First, I need to say that some of these ground plans were planned, but some of these other ground plans were not planned. Okay, and in the original conception of Conzen, a ground plan didn't need to be planned. So it was just looking at what the urban landscape of a place is. And in all cities, we have parts that were planned and other parts that were not planned. So here we are looking at both. I think that planning can have a major effect in reducing inequalities. I have the feeling that in some places it has contributed to making these inequalities even stronger, and maybe because it haven't been focusing on the most effective aspects to deal with that inequality. For instance, in terms of the urban form, most planning systems tend to focus on the most ephemeral parts of the landscape. They tend to focus on buildings, on architectural styles, on controlling the height of buildings without relating them to that street where they fit. So I think that we cannot generalize. Of course, each place is a completely different story. But answering your question, I think planning can have a huge effect in reducing inequalities. I have the feeling that in most places it could do more if its focus was more effective. And so we need to know, for planning to be effective, it needs to be evaluated, and there must be a rigorous, as possible, link between this action that I do and the results that are obtained. If I don't understand this, I continue to plan without knowing the results of what I do. So I'm in a closed box. I can have the best intentions, but if I don't evaluate my actions, I'm not able to be better. I don't know if I answered your question
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mariam. I think last comment is from Michelle. If you'd like to state it, or you'd like us to read it for you.
No, I have. Michelle is the last one, right? Or
yeah, yeah, she's with. Yeah.
No, it was. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, sorry, I'm on my phone now. No, I just thought I'd mention that you know, Rappaport, for instance, reminds us that the cultural context within which we work always reflects in terms of the street and particularly the street frontage. So as Victor said, it's so important to understand the social implications of the way that we design. And I think Manhattan is a fantastic project area to remind us of where we can learn of that social life in terms of the interface between the building structure and the street. And whether that happens, you know, in the vertical or in the two-dimensional, it's important that we understand the implications of this in terms of the social context. But Manhattan is definitely a good reminder of the power of that social interface and its contribution to the street.
thanks, Michelle.
Thank you very much. And we can conclude from this point, and we really thank you, Vítor, for being here with us. This interesting presentation plus the discussion forward, it is really valuable, and we hope that we can have future collaboration together. And I would like also to thank the audience, and if you'd like to have any last words, Vítor.
Again, thank you for the invitation, and it was a pleasure to be here today with you. Okay, thank you all.
It's a pleasure is ours. Thank you very much. See you.
Have a nice evening.
You too. Bye bye. Thanks, everyone.